which held in Nairobi, Kenya. It was in the month of May 2024, highlighted urgent commitment from African head of states to revitalize the agricultural sector, with over 4,000 participants, including government leaders, agricultural experts, and civil society representatives. This summit highlighted the critical need for sustainable and innovative solutions to enhance soil health and increase the accessibility and affordability of fertilizer for smallholder farmers. The summit, the Nairobi Declaration, was launched underscoring the continent's resolve to triple the production of both organic and inorganic fertilizer by the year 2034 and restore soil health on at least 30% of the degraded land within the same time frame. These commitments are not merely aspirational. They represent a roadmap for achieving food security and environmental sustainability in an era marked by climate change and other challenges. First, with a panel of diverse experts, we want to analyze the prospect of extensive and industrialized agriculture in Africa, examining the strategies, challenges, and opportunities presented by these transformative initiatives. And of course, this is Global Insight. What prospect for industrialized or extensive agriculture in Africa? The leaders, stakeholders met in Nairobi, Kenya on, from the 7th to the 9th of May 2024 to analyze the stakes pertaining the agriculture sector. And at the end, they came with a Nairobi Declaration actually advocating for a more robust into the soil health in Africa and how this can help solve food insecurity and other challenges pertaining agriculture in Africa. You're most welcome. And of course, we are going straight away to unveiling the panel of experts. Let's acknowledge the presence of Dr. TEMITOPE OLUWASEUN, who is an environmental economist and joining us from Nigeria today to give highlights on this very important topic that dwells on the agriculture sector across Africa.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. And well, thank you for inviting me. I'm really pleased to actually join the group of panelists to have a little discourse about what is actually happening around the issue of African fertilizer vis-a-vis the issue of agricultural transformation in Africa. Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you for accepting to be with us this day. We also acknowledge the presence of Professor WOLE FATUNBI, who is the Director of Research, AG Director of Research and Innovation FARA. Hello to you, Professor, and thanks for gracing our platform this day. Professor WOLE? While waiting for Professor WOLE, let's acknowledge Dr. Elijah ENOAKU, Director of Center for African Development. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Clarice, for having me one more time. Good to be on the show after a while. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and thank you. And of course, we are pleased to have you again as we continue to brainstorm on this very important aspect of the continent, the agricultural sector. And joining from Moscow is YULIA, BERG, political scientist and founder, GLOBus Expert Club. Welcome to the program this day, YULIA.
Good afternoon, and happy to join once again and discuss this very strategic issue.
Indeed, it is very strategic, and we are going to look at ways on how the land can be made very useful to ensure sustainability in agriculture and, of course, food security. Before entering into the analysis, let's listen to this excerpt of President William Ruto of Kenya, the address he presented to the summit that held in May.
To be here on the beginning of this pivotal summit, which emphatically revisits a historic moment of Africa's green revolution ambition with a focus on soil health and especially the use of fertilizer. Today, Africa remains heavily reliant on food imports, highlighting the limited progress achieved decades after the Abuja Declaration. Clearly, we have very important issues to reflect upon and resolve as a matter of urgency, and this summit offers us a perfect opportunity for this engagement. Across Africa, our people face numerous serious challenges that hinder their efforts and investment in enhancing agricultural opportunities and productivity. These include the inadequate fertilizer application, extreme weather adversities, flooding on one end, as we are witnessing in East Africa, drought, as we are witnessing in South Africa, and extensive land degradation, among others. All this point to a broader issue of poor soil health, which is central to our conversation in this summit. Recent global economic crisis that we all understand, including the serious economic issues and challenges that most countries face, compounded by supply chain disruptions from the COVID-19 pandemic, and of course, the geopolitical dynamics, including the war in the middle of Europe, have worsened fertilizer affordability and availability and disrupted agriculture and agricultural production, resulting in reduced acreage that is currently under crop, and also reducing food security availability. This summit presents an opportunity to collectively deliberate and sustain our ambition by converting challenges into opportunities. To achieve this, we must assess our current situation within the broader context of our African potential.
In fact, turning our challenges into opportunities in solving problems pertaining to agriculture in Africa. Just to note that the Nairobi summit reiterated the 2006 Abuja Declaration, which actually accentuated on the poor productivity of African soils and how they can be actually mitigated to ensure food security across the continent. I will kick off with you, dear Yulia. We are actually discussing a very strategic topic, agricultural sector, and taking focus on the May 2024 Agriculture, Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit that held in Nairobi, Kenya. Holistically, what prospects of this summit for extensive and industrialized agriculture in Africa, pertaining the challenges ranging from every sphere?
Well, food security issue is one of the basic ones. And here, if we want to analyze the strategies that could be applied and also the outcomes of the summit that was held in Nairobi in May and the one that was held back in 2006, we need to look at high-level input data and high-level facts. So those high-level facts say that 60% of fertile or potentially fertile land in Africa is not being used on the one hand, On the second hand, we see that there are major problems with malnutrition or with starvation, even in some cases, and generally speaking, lack of food and, let's say, food products, right? Not just the raw, let's say, agricultural products, but also processed one. So solutions to that kind of issues should also be, on the one hand, strategic. On the other hand, there has to be a step-by-step approach. So taking it down to a more specific framework, just like it was being discussed at the summit, we can split it into more, let's say, tactical steps, also looking at the strategies that could be applied. So we see that it's not a problem of lack of resource in Africa, right? It has all the fertile land that is needed to feed not just the continent itself, but also some of the neighbors and some of the countries that lack even capacity or potential ability to produce agricultural products. But we see that there are some systematic, let's say, systematic issues that have been resulting into the current situation. So as we know, most of the fertilizer coming to Africa was and is still coming from Russia and Belarus, which is in a union state with the Russian Federation. And we see that during the last several years, that was troubled by some of the geopolitical issues, as direct trade with Russia is not possible due to transaction problems that all of the sellers and buyers are facing. And so one of the reasons that the fertilizers are much more expensive when they reach the continent is that you have to deal with several middlemen, right?
Indeed.
So this is the current issue, and we can analyze it more in order to see how and why it is happening that the supply is disrupted. But on the other hand, this provides a solution that is, let's say, temporary. And also a big issue, just as widely discussed during the summit, is the research on the land itself in order to be able to select the opportunities of doing agriculture. So the program we will be talking about it, but I think at the end, what is the goal? The strategic goal to look at is having having the research done. That's number one. Having the necessary infrastructure created also within the framework of joint ventures, right?
Sure.
And number three is definitely producing not just, let's say, raw agricultural products, but also processing them and then selling them at the international market to, let's say, the European countries that are lacking fertile land and are in need and in demand, but selling those with added value at a price set by the African actors themselves.
Okay, thank you so much for that holistic preamble into our topic for discussion, Yulia. Let's continue with Professor WOLE FATUNBI, who is joining from Nigeria. Of course, Professor, will appreciate if you give your appraisal of the May 2024 Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit that concluded with some 13 very key points which summarize into seeing how they can boost productivity and ensure a healthier soil or land for especially smallholder farmers across the continent.
Much moderator for having me here and our listeners. Well, the African Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit held in May is one of the most important things that I consider has happened to Africa agriculture in recent time, especially in the last 2 decades. Maybe going from the 2006 summit on fertilizer, the Abuja summit, and up to this moment. You know, the political will at this time is unprecedented in the history of Africa agriculture, and the willingness of the stakeholders, the international partners, and African Union, the precursor of it all itself,
Unfortunately, we lost you, Professor WOLE. Hoping that you can fix everything and join subsequently. Let's continue with the analysis. Indeed, the stakes are high as we have to involve many factors, especially as far as policy and governance is concerned, to ensure that the declaration, Nairobi Declaration, is fully implemented. From the perspective of the Director of
well, has been given the mandate to coordinate. Let me go straight to the issue of the issue that the summit addressed.
Okay, Professor, right on.
As internet is fluctuating, the larger proportion of African soil is degraded. 63% of the current soil we are cultivating on the continent, they are at different levels of degradation. And this is really dangerous for the continent. The second issue is a complicated subject of should Africa continue to use fertilizer or go the organic fertilizer. So the head of states give a lot of attention to this, and just like you said, there are 21 pointed action and in the declaration, and 13 of them.
That 13 of them
are quite practical.
So the head of state expect that when we implement all these things, we should be able
to
Professor, please, can you avoid listening to yourself while intervening at the same time so we can mitigate the interruption? While you're fixing that, we'll take us to Canada to meet Dr. Elijah ENOAKU, who will actually give holistically on the importance or the prospects of, extensive and industrialized agriculture for Africa, especially in the 21st century.
Thank you, Clarice. I hope quite clear and there is no echo at the background. I don't know. Oh, okay. Something going on in the background there. There's an echo from the studio or something.
Yes, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU, while we are going to take this excerpt while we try to fix the interruption, and of course still listening to the viewpoints of President echoing and stressing on the 2006 Abuja Declaration in accordance, in conformity with the 2024 Declaration of Nairobi, to ensure soil fertility and productivity that will mitigate food insecurity across Africa. Let's listen to the excerpt, and I will join you right after that.
To be here on the beginning of this pivotal summit, which absence of nitrogen fertilizer production plants due to high capital requirements underscores the need for regional investment collaboration to enhance our self-sufficiency in fertilizer manufacturing.
It is unfortunate that despite the inherent potential, Africa currently spends billions of dollars in food and fertilizer imports per year. Greater efforts must be made to leverage the availability of raw materials for the local production of mineral fertilizers.
Fertilizer is not affordable. It means when we produce the food will be expensive. We shouldn't depend on others to supply us with fertilizer from outside the continent. Therefore, we need to invest, I agree with President Ruto, on our continent to increase the capacity to produce fertilizer. Yes, using our raw materials as much as possible.
And of course, some African leaders who attended the summit and reiterating the need to capitalize on the internal factors as well as some very favorable external partners to bolster the production of fertilizer of greater quality, hoping that all is well. We'll come back to you, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU, on the prospects of extensive industrialized agriculture that will commensurate the Nairobi and even the Abuja declaration on the soil productivity across Africa.
Okay, Clarice, I suppose you can hear me now clearly and well.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think this is one of the most strategic areas that Africa is supposed to focus on. This is an area that we expect all African head of states to be actually focused on. At our center, these are some of the things that we've done extensive research on to see why is it that Africa, that has close to 30% of the world's arable land where you don't need fertilizer or anything like that, why is it that we are importing everything we need from sticks for matches and all whatnot, but forgetting that agriculture is the strong suit of Africa, because when you are doing strategy, when you are strategizing as a continent or as a country, you are looking at what you can produce at a very low cost. Because if you listen to one of the presidents there, he said that fertilizer is very expensive in Africa, and I agree with him. It is very expensive because Africa has not strategized itself in terms of the sectors that you want to invest in. So when that strategization is done, and then we have African leaders that are speaking with one voice and looking at where they can garner investment from all over the world. When I say all over the world, all the agreements and all the organizations, whether sub-regional organization or South-South Cooperation or the United States Africa Summit or whatever it is, if they are speaking with one voice, Clarice, and say we are going to this conference and number one thing that we're going to hit on the table is agriculture, agriculture, agriculture. Our people are importing food, meanwhile we have everything it takes to be the one exporting food in Africa. If you look at fertilizer production in the world, the first, I think, 5 countries in the world are the ones that have very good alliances with Africa. If you look at number 1, is the United States. Number 2 is India. Number 3 is Russia. All these countries, if you take India, for example, and Russia, they are part of the BRICS organization. And when they go to African countries that are plugging to the BRICS right now, what is supposed to be their strategy? Their strategy is Russia, who's a partner to many African countries now, and India, who's a partner to a lot of African countries now, should say, we want you guys to export the technology that you have in producing fertilizers and extensive agriculture. We want to work together. We're not saying that you export your technology for nothing. We want to work together. Let's go into a partnership so that that technology that you're using, we can implement it in Africa, so that all this discussion about soil degradation, enabling the environment or capacity building and so on, we will actually have that in Africa, so that when we produce fertilizers in Africa, we are able to sell it to the local farmers at affordable rates, so that it's not going to increase the prices of goods and services that have been produced in Africa. So that is the strategy that African countries are supposed to invest on. The second thing I want to say is a little bit political, but you ask yourself, look at how many countries in Africa attended that conference. That is supposed to be a conference that almost all African countries are supposed to be attending, because that is the breadbasket of the economies of Africa. Agriculture, agriculture, agriculture. So from a strategic point of view, Africa themselves, or the leaders of Africa, are lacking. Number 2, we talked about soil health. My colleague from Nigeria who was having an internet problem mentioned about reversing the degradation of soil in Africa. How do you reverse this degradation of soil in Africa when we are a little bit complacent by saying that, oh, should we use fertilizers in Africa? Should we not use fertilizer in Africa? That kind of mentality should completely be erased. Why? I'll explain to you. Yeah. Even if you do not use the fertilizer in Africa. The rice that you are buying from the Western world, almost all the goods and services, goods that you are buying, agricultural goods that you are buying from the Western world, fertilizer have been applied to produce these goods. So it is counterproductive to say, oh, should we use fertilizers or not? And if you look at fertilizers, the technology that produces fertilizers, what is it? You simply crack air, methane, and gas. And gas is produced predominantly in Africa. So in terms of the raw materials to produce the fertilizer itself, we have them in Africa. We have them in abundance in Africa. So you take this gas, you crack it, you crack air, and then you produce urea. And that's what fertilizer is, even though they add a few other things here and there, but that's technically what fertilizer is. So it's not a complex chemical that is gotten from somewhere and then mixed together and then sent to Africa. It's common elements that people are using every day that is being used to produce fertilizer. So I just want to dispel this notion that, oh, maybe fertilizer is a bad thing for Africa, we shouldn't use it. No. Number two, we talk about, my colleague talked about creating an enabling environment, formalizing policies that improve the systems. Ladies and gentlemen from all over the world that you're listening to me, if Africa does not put its priorities right, I'm telling you the truth, we will be talking on this issue for centuries to come. If our priorities is not to look at what our strong suit is our priorities is rather looking at buying weapons to protect, sit tight presidents and buying weapons to protect this and protect this. Meanwhile, our number one priority is supposed to be agriculture, 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 and education. When we talk about this, you can now start talking about the technology that is needed to produce this. You talk about the science behind it. You talk about the universities. But first and foremost, if the strategy is wrong, we can talk about all these things all day long. If the focus is wrong, we can talk about all these things long. So I don't want to take so much of the time because of other panelists, but I just want to lay the groundwork is Africa needs to redo its strategy. This conference that took place in Kenya is supposed to have been attended massively by all African head of states and not wait for maybe a summit in the United States or in Saudi Arabia or in Russia to go and sit there and put their heads together and say they are discussing about issues of Africa. This is Africa, and that is what they are supposed to be doing.
Thank you so much indeed, Dr. ENOAKU. The stakes are high and there is a need for continuous summits or even avenues that will exchange knowledge for better understanding, especially on the use of fertilizer and how soils can be maintained to ensure productivity so as to even reduce the price of commodities across the continent. Now, just to reiterate before coming to you, Dr. TEMITOPE, we are talking about some of the commitments arrived at after the Nairobi conference, and some of the points were to triple the production and distribution of organic and inorganic fertilizer by 2033 to increase accessibility and affordability for small-scale producers, provide at least 70% of farmers with appropriate recommendations to ensure greater efficiency and sustainability fertilizer use. There we are talking on the know-how. So the question I will ask you, Dr. TEMITOPE, in your perspective as an environmental economist, what are those specificities that needs to be addressed to ensure that these declarations are actually implemented and the result is being will be seen by the stated time frame?
Thank you very much once again for having me. And I'm so happy and excited with the fact that my previous speakers had said so much about the discourse. And there's no gainsaying that it is still rhetoric, because if you look at what happened in Abuja 2006, the declaration as to what is happening, like what happened in the Kenya declaration in May, You can see the progression. It is so minute in the sense that 50 kg of fertilizer that is presumed to be the acceptable quantity is yet to be achieved, which means from that 2006 up to this moment, they've been able to achieve an average of 10 kilograms being applied to agricultural production like per hectare. You know, this is a clear call for every single person in that country. It's I mean, in the continent. This is a continent whereby like greater percentage of the employment is actually taken care of by agriculture. And it is so saddening, it is so disheartening at this moment that just like the way the last speaker said that the many leaders of Africa are supposed to be at the meeting, but they are nowhere to be found. One of the perspectives that I think I'll be coming from is this. There's going to be, for us to achieve the desired goal, there's going to be a kind of comprehensive overhaul from the downstream and also the upstream. What do I mean by comprehensive overall from the downstream and the upstream? Now, when you're speaking about the downstream, you're speaking about the input supply because we are looking at the value chain. Who are the actors along the value chain? You know, we are speaking about the agricultural production vis-a-vis food insecurity. Who are these actors along the value chain? Starting from the input supplier, which we are speaking about the issue of the fertilizer. Is there any form of market integration that we need to put in place? This has to be a kind of holistic approach. We're able to, like, I'll give an instance of what happened in Nigeria in 2011 when we had the present African Development Bank, that's Dr. Akiwumi Adesina. You know, when he came on board as the Minister of Agriculture in Nigeria, one of the first things that he did, because there was this kind of corruption as regards the transfer or even how to deliver or distribute the fertilizer or input to the farmers, because we have so much political farmers. So many political farmers, they are not involved in agriculture, but these are the ones taking up the fertilizer and reselling to the farmers. And as a result of that, there is a kind of increased cost of production. What did he do? There is a kind of introduction of digital agriculture. You know, it came up with a platform that is the e-wallet platform, whereby you, as a farmer, you would have the direct contact with the flow, with the chain of this distribution of the fertilizer. And as a result of that, in 2011 to 2013, it was able to like maximize so many things, so many opportunities. The company moved from 10% to 91%. The record is there. And that's where we are seeing that Dr. Kim will be doing excellently well in African Development Bank. So for us to be able to achieve this goal, there is going to be a total comprehensive overhaul of upstream and downstream. Then when I'm speaking about the issue of the upstream, after the production that the farmers have gotten the necessary input, there is market integration. The farmers have this notion that by the time I'm done producing my let's say my maize or any form of cereal, there is a market for me. There is a kind of encouragement for me to go into production in the next cycle. So with that, there's going to be a kind of comprehensive flow of the chain. The supply chain is well comprehensive enough. So if the case of the middlemen are totally taken off, fine, we are not able to take off the whole thing totally, but at least to an extent, this issue of the middlemen is reduced to a barest minimum. I'm pretty sure that this goal that we're trying to achieve by 2030 might actually be achieved. We could actually cause it to be achievable in a way. But if we fail to be able to like deal with it from the comprehensive point of view, trust me, the same issues that we have in 2006 will repeat itself. By the time we are making the next declaration, maybe in the next 10 years, thereabout, there is a plan that has been set up. If that is not taken, this same implementation that has not been taking place since 2006 will still carry on like that. And this is an opportunity for us because of this issue in Ukraine and Russia, because of the war that is happening. You can imagine that more than 30%, more than 30 million tons of cereals, are kind of like we are short of 30 million of cereals in Africa at the moment. This is an opportunity for an African, and that's why I always come from this angle that a pessimist will see difficulty in every form of opportunity, while an optimist will see opportunity in every form of difficulty. This is a difficulty in the situation of what is happening in Russia and Ukraine, because there is a heavy reliance on importation of different input, the fertilizer, and even the cereals. So if the leaders in Africa can actually come together and come up with an holistic move, trust me, there is a likelihood there's going to be an improvement at the end of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. TEMITOPE, for that. And of course, we continue to look at from the holistic introduction that you all experts have actually pinpointed. We can say that the preamble, the premise has been set, and we are at the level of the implementation, and that's where we're going to focus our analysis to ensuring that the stakeholders at the fore in trying to drive the agricultural sector in Africa can take off from there. Coming back to you, YULIA, when we listen to everything that has been highlighted, the problem brings us to policy and governance. Faced with all of these challenges and the changing happening especially at the global level, the President William Ruto highlighted how the crisis in Europe has affected the food supply chain in Africa, and of course it has been reiterated by the panelists in the course of this program already. So let's interrogate the role of policy and governance in fast tracking these declarations. The Abuja 2006 declaration with the 2024 declaration that was masterminded by the ambassador for Africa, for agriculture at the African Union, Josepha Saku.
Yes, now that we take a closer look at that very framework and those goals that were set also during the summit in Kenya in May this year, we start realizing that what is actually needed is a holistic, complex approach, right? Because when we look at the agricultural issues, if we want it or not, we face the issues of logistics, right? Both logistics that ensure trade with foreign partners, both suppliers and possible buyers of agricultural products. We look at issues of internal logistics, and we already know that even though there is certain framework laid within the free trade agreement, it's not being used to its actual capacity, and it's already a very good factor for development of trade within the continent that would allow to exchange agricultural products depending on the qualities and properties of soil and many other factors. But it's not happening to a full extent yet. At the same time, we do have such success cases and examples when we look at Zambia, for instance, that manages to export quite a lot of agricultural products, but still imports the ones that it's lacking. Yeah. And unfortunately, we've seen rise and fall of many agricultural states in Africa, for example, Zimbabwe, that used to feed not just itself, but also export a lot of products. Just 5 years ago, it was importing almost everything, including apples. Or we have Central African Republic that relies on neighbors to a great extent, not being able to fulfill the demands of its population. So logistics is one of the issues that we would face when we analyze what else is needed. But then if we're talking about development of agriculture as an industry, not just in terms of making sure that the land is fertile and that agricultural products do grow there, but when we talk about even preliminary, let's say, production or moreover, production of frozen products or canned products, everything else, sooner or later we will face the issue of energy. Energy is absolutely essential to develop industry, and this kind of project would definitely require making sure that there is the generation capacity for that. So all of those issues coming together definitely bring us to the fact that aside for separate strategies regulating various areas like agriculture or energy or logistics, there have to be holistic plans that would make sure that that development is designed in an optimal way, right? That, for instance, if we have some agricultural areas, that they have whatever is necessary, from energy to housing for the workers, to state policies that somehow regulate and support local farmers, and at the same time regulate and create state-owned or partially state-owned agricultural companies that would be also very helpful in terms of distribution of fertilizers, in terms of promotion of farming, in terms of providing support for local farmers, making sure that their products get to the market at an adequate price, right? As now what we see in many countries in Africa is that agricultural products, or the ones that were grown by farmers, would cost much more at the market than the products that are provided by big companies and agricultural holdings. But in this case, when we want to talk about how healthy the products are, we also see major differences, right?
Sure.
Because many companies and corporations would use, for example, dry milk or products that imply gene modifications of those cultures. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that there has to be a holistic plan, and the government plays the key role in gathering experts from various sectors, not just agriculture alone, but also other sectors that would ensure development of agriculture, in order to come up with a complex plan that would optimize the resources used and partnerships that could exist.
Thank you. Just to remind our viewers joining that this is Global Insight on For You Media Africa, and today we are analyzing the May 2024 Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit that concluded with a 13-point declaration, and we are looking at the prospect of extensive and industrialized agriculture in contemporary Africa. Of course, while you've highlighted, Yulia, that it takes a collective effort of African government to address the challenges facing the agriculture sector. I will come back to you, Professor WOLE, with this question that looks at the cross-border cooperation in order to ensure, connectivity and, of course, the sharing of expertise as far as the agricultural sector is concerned. So in your capacity, how can African nations strengthen these regional partnerships that will ensure the successful implementation of the commitment outlined in the Nairobi Declaration, and particularly what role can regional economic communities play in facilitating this collaboration?
Yeah, thank you very much, and apologies for this internet fluctuation. You observed that I have changed my source of internet to a phone and in a car. Well, so please, everybody, accept my apologies for that. Well, let's go straight to the point.
Yeah.
The points that are highlighted in the declaration and the issues that are addressed in the declaration, they are not rocket science. It is doable, and the African Union Commission, working with all other organizations on the continent, are putting mechanisms for partnerships in place so that we can implement these actively and deliver. I mean, it will be important for every one of us to learn lessons from the 2006. And the key problem that prevented the 2006 from yielding results was that after the summit, everybody 2006 was the AFFM, African Fertilizer Financing Mechanism.
As good as that is, without coordination, it does not work. Now, African Union has put a coordination mechanism in place that put FAUNDR, okay, and FAUNDR and other organizations together to ensure that these issues are implemented. I'll be glad to also inform you and our listeners that the donor community, that is the African, the development partners for Africa, they have also agreed to coordinate their investment into this issue of soil health and fertilizer on the continent. And this is being led by USAID. I mean, you have all the organizations there, the USAID, the Chairman, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations, and all others, even the EC, IFAD, they are all participating in this coalition of donors. It gives me a lot of hope that we can move on together. Let me say that as FAUNDR is coordinating the participation of the regional economic communities, the same way FARA is coordinating the participation of the sub-regional organization, the CORAF for Western Central Africa, ASARECA for Eastern and Central Africa, CADESA for Southern Africa, and NASCO for North Africa. African Union Commission sits at the top. While this is being done, there are coalitions that are coming up. There is the coalition of implementers for fertilizer, so for technology and innovation. There is the other coalition that is formed for extension and advisory services. There is the coalition that is formed already for private sector engagement. And there is the coalition that is formed for human capital development. These are the core issues. There is a new coalition that is coming up on the soil information system. When you put all these together in a bit, and you have a central coordination that pull all effort together, we will be able to meet the 10 years set by our leaders for the different components. And we expect that this is going to lead to the type of success we have. Let me say that the expected outcome of the African Fertilizer and Soil Health Action Plan is not going to reinvent the wheel, but it's going to build on existing framework at the continental level. Number one, it's going to build on the CADEP framework, the Comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program. It's been going on for about 2 decades. Then the reporting is going to be fitted into the existing biennial report on the progress of agriculture at the different country level. Of course, you know about the Agenda 2063 of the African Union. The strive for that is the African Way Work. It's also going to be fitted into that and other frameworks on the continent and at the global level. If you will give me a minute plus to express a few sentiments around what my contemporaries on this panel have said, I want to correct a notion. And the notion I want to correct is that stripe word that African soil is very rich and there is nothing to be done about it. That is not scientifically correct. And it will be good for us to check data, literature very well, that African soil is the whole soil in the world. In fact, the organic matter content of African soil is very low and it limits its productivity. African soil is made up of low activity clay mineral. And so things like cation exchange capacity, even the anion exchange capacity is very low, suggesting that if you are going to get productivity, good productivity from African soil continuously, then it must be managed carefully. We need to speak unequivocally against the social movement that is saying that African soil do not need external input. No, we need to apply mineral fertilizer to supply nutrients at the critical nutrient requirement of the crop we are planting. And we need to supply organic fertilizer, compost, to increase the humus content of the soil, without which mineral fertilizer will not be functional. And so it's an holistic approach to manage our soil. Yes, while agroecology is good for all, we will go the agroecology way, but agroecology must be defined in the context, in fact, relating to the truth about African soil. You get it? and we need to manage it very well. Let me stop there. It appears I'm extremely passionate about this subject.
For that insight. It is actually a platform here where we get to share information pertaining some of the issues affecting Africa and the global world at large. And we are touching agriculture to the Dr. Elijah ENOAKU. When we talk about agriculture in Africa, we want to think about, the smallholder farmers, the informal sector of this, particular segment that have little or no knowledge about all of these, the available scope that can ensure soil productivity, fertility, and ensure sustainability in the production of food. So what is the role of stakeholders in engaging these smallholder farmers on maybe representatives that can discuss grassroots challenges and solutions that will align with this framework of 2030 to ensure, access to quality fertilizer and ensure of more fertile and productive soils?
Thank you, Clarice. Thank you, Clarice. I was listening to my colleague from Nigeria. I was listening to him very carefully with those lofty ideas, and I agree that they are all good departments put in place. But if you contrast what my colleague from Nigeria said with the other, can't remember his name, the other colleague from Nigeria, about results, yeah. I am all out for results. Because what we have seen in Africa is all these lofty ideas that do not really generate any concrete action on the ground. I'll give you an example. My colleagues in Nigeria, the two of them are in Nigeria. If you remember in the early 1970s, the Benue region, that is supposed to be the breadbasket of agriculture in Nigeria, the government at that time came out with a structure for sustainable development in the Benue region. Everything was put in place because they wanted to take advantage of this drought that was happening in the Sahel. There was a strategy that was put in place. But what happened? In the early 80s, boom, the oil boom came, and everybody abandoned the strategy that was put in place by the government, by the previous government. And the Benue region that is supposed to be the breadbasket of Nigeria and even the whole of Central Africa or West Africa, what is it today? It is struggling. So what am I saying? It is good we can put all these lofty committees and ideas in place, but we are talking about pragmatic solutions to the problem in Africa. Listen to what the other gentleman said, that when the current governor of the Bank of Central the African Bank, Dr. Adesina, when was Minister of Agriculture, he harmonized the distribution of fertilizers within Nigeria in such a way that all those middlemen that were a problem to, fertilizer getting to the smallholders that you mentioned. I'll come back to your question. I just want to analyze this.
Sure.
To the smallholders and all the farmers and all the people, he harmonized it in such a way that you can compare the production of agriculture before his time to the present, to the situation at that time. So it's not rocket science, like my colleague said. It's not rocket science, but let's explain these things in a way that makes sense to the common man. The problem we have in Africa is lack of strategization to understand that Africa is supposed to be focusing on agriculture because that is where we have a competitive advantage. We don't have a competitive advantage in production of cars. We don't have even a competitive advantage even in production of oil and gas that, countries like Nigeria will boast of their oil and gas. But what percentage of the oil and gas that is produced in Nigeria is actually being used for the economy of Nigeria? What percentage of it? But if you talk about agriculture, where the common peasant farmers in the Benue region, within the Lake Chad region, Sokoto, and so on, if you talk about agriculture and we talk about capacity building. You are able to give the tools and the resources for these people to produce these things. We do understand that there are logistical problems about farm to market rates and all these things. We can talk about that, but let the capacity building be there for these local farmers to produce at a massive level. And then you are going to see real competition from the West, because it is true that when it comes to capital, the West has a little bit of competitive advantage because they have the technology and everything to produce massively. But even within Africa, we are talking about a double whammy here. We're being hit by soil that is already degraded, and we're being hit by lack of minerals, fertilizers, and so on, and the capacity for people to produce. So the strategy is lacking. That's what I keep repeating. Now, to come back to your question, Clarice, what is the role of these local farmers? It is capital. It is the number one. These are the people that are producing, that are feeding Africa. Or let me say, trying to feed Africa, because they're not succeeding, because Africa is still importing a lot from the Western world. So in terms of these people, number one, access to capital markets. If you look at the local farmers, what is going to take for them to access capital that they need in order to procure fertilizers or the little technology that they need to produce in a big way, it is not there. They don't have that access. They don't have that access. In terms of loans and access, let's not even go to the aspect of education, because I know education, like the professor said, education, soil technology and all this, quite true. But the peasant farmers that are actually there producing now, they do not have access to the market, capital market, that they can, procure that, the fertilizer we are talking about. Because if you look at the testimony that the other gentleman gave, that is a testimony to tell you that we know the problems in Africa. Dr. Adesina was able to come in within a short while, cut off all the bottlenecks, cut off the middleman, and then was able to reach the local farmers, and they were able to produce at a higher capacity than what they're doing now. So what I'm saying is, let us invest in our local farmers, in our small farmers. We can now talk about, the logistic, farm to markets, technology, and so on. But let's begin by giving them the tools that they need to produce at that level. And then we're able to now boost capacity by bringing technology, by now talking about farm to market roads, talking about preservation, because we know that one of the challenges in Africa is preservation of the products that are being produced from the market. Yeah. If we produce a cassava today, I know cassava can be transformed to gari and all the other things. But what about banana? In what way can we, preserve the products of that banana and make it in such a way that it can be kept and sold after a number of months and so on? That is a different thing. But again, let us make sure that we have strategies in place, concrete strategies with actionable items, not strategies that we say, I was talking to some colleague at the United Nations about Africa Agenda 2063 and so on. I was like, okay, this pillars, number one, number two, number three, what has been done? You go and find out that everything's on paper. There's nothing concrete on the ground that's happening. So when we come out with these lofty organizations and corporations and departments and so on, and we do not have something concrete happening on the ground, that is where my problem is. Because examples have shown us that when there is concrete action, actionable items on the ground, we see results within a short while. Absolutely. It's not rocket science.
Absolutely.
So I think that we need to, enable the local farmers and give them the capacity, and we will see results within a very short time. That's my strategy about this.
Thank you so much for elaborating on that, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU. Dr. TEMITOPE, you quite highlighted something very imperative, and I want us to look at this other challenge, because, when you look at it critically, even when Africa wants to export, you see that the agricultural produce or commodities that leave the African continent may be living in its raw form. And I think this is even helping to exacerbate poverty across the continent. I quite remember that the president of the African Development Bank, that was in 2023, shared a viewpoint on the fact that Africa should stop exporting raw agricultural commodities. Now we are looking at the way forward in trying to, complement the commitments or the points which have been highlighted by the major stakeholders. From our preamble, we heard that over 4,000 people, including head of state and even the AU ambassador for agriculture, were part of this summit. So how can we, ensure the transformation of agricultural commodities in Africa rather than export raw agricultural commodities?
Thank you very much. I really find this discussion very interesting because you can see the diverse views from different angles. And I would also take the cue from the last speaker, where it was actually like trying to delve into the issue of infrastructure. Whether we like it or not, these farmers are there. This is what they have been doing from the ages past, maybe even while they were growing up. This is what the farmers have been doing. They have the knowledge, they have the requisite knowledge to go into production. And what he made an emphasis on the case of capital, like giving them credit and the likes. Should be told, these farmers, they need that credit. They need the financial capacity. They need to be empowered, if I can use that word. You need to be empowered financially, in the sense that it could be in form of trade credit, in the sense that you have different organizations or maybe like a company or industries being set up within the location of some farmers. They could actually come together as a cooperative and the likes. Let them, like for example, let's say in terms of tomato production in Nigeria, tomato is mostly produced from the north and is mostly consumed in the west. And the transportation from the north to the west, definitely you are giving room for post-harvest losses. And in a way to be able to reduce these post-harvest losses, the infrastructure must be put in place. Is there a way this particular tomato could be processed immediately at the north, maybe into paste, or if there is a way this thing could be regenerated, maybe the storage capacity and the likes? The farmers, they do not have the capacity to be able to afford all these technologies. They do not have the capacity to be able to afford all this infrastructure. So if there is a kind of enabling environment from the government, for example, if there is this kind of enabling environment, provision of infrastructure, and this cannot even be achieved by the government alone, there's going to be a kind of framework whereby there's going to be a combination of like a public-private partnership. The government would earmark all their plans, and it would allow the private organizations to drive this. If these things are put in place, trust me, the smallholder farmers that are the forefront of feeding the nation. And I'm happy with the last speaker. He said that they are the ones feeding the nation, but in a way they have failed because we are still importing. And based on the what the study that I've said, that over $78 billion is actually spent on importation on an annual basis. This is a clear call to all the African leaders that, okay, this part of this 78 billion, almost $80 billion that is spent on importation, is that way this can actually be distributed to the farmers in different countries or in different locations in terms of infrastructure. They want to get the storage facilities for them, or they want to make markets available to them, because most of these farmers are discouraged. Let me give you an instance of what happened in 2011. I was involved in a project funded by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The PI was Professor Bamire, the present Vice Chancellor of Obafemi Awolowo University. When we got to the farm, because we were interviewing the cassava farmers, and they were giving us their audio, like there was a particular policy that was put in place that they were had to go into production of cassava. And at that point, because all of them ventured into cassava in Oyo State, because Oyo State happens to be the highest producer of cassava in Nigeria. So they all ventured into the production of cassava. At the end of the day, there is a kind of problem of policy somersault. They were encouraged to go into the cassava production, that this will be processed into flour, cassava flour for making bread and the likes. So along the line, this policy was stopped, and the farmers at that point, they resolved to selling the produce at the lower price, because then the force of demand and supply will determine the price. Yeah. So if there are infrastructure put in place for these farmers to be able to process the produce, even if they do not have the capacity, let them put together, or maybe that an industry is set up within some framework, within a kind of location whereby we'll be able to uptake their produce. These guys will be encouraged. They will not be deterred in going into production. And with that, trust me, they will be more encouraged in going into production, and we'll be able to achieve our goal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. TEMITOPE. And now we'll bring in the role of cooperation in trying to solve this and highlighting especially the transfer of technology or expertise. Coming back to you, dear Yulia, we are looking at, financing mechanism and even technology transfer in trying to mitigate some of the challenges that the agricultural sector is facing in Africa. Let's look at the cooperation between the Russian Federation and the African continent, noting that with the Ukraine crisis, the food supply chain actually was disrupted, and the effects were faced negatively across the African continent. But then in the multipolar world, we look at new perspectives and alliances that can help salvage some of these problems around the agricultural sector. So how can the Russia-Africa cooperation help to mitigate, especially the circulation of low quality fertilizer, and also ensure the transfer of expertise that can easily lead to local transformation of agricultural commodities that will reduce actually some of these problems faced by smallholder farmers that are at the forefront?
Well, it's a very good question that you are asking, but to provide a clear answer, I think we would need to break it down into several different aspects. Sure. So the way I perceive it, and the colleagues present here could correct me if I'm being wrong, but a lot of the agricultural capacities of many African countries were destroyed by the policies that allowed big corporations to enter and to basically substitute local farming with a different type of production. So I want to take an example of milk industry and the industry of milk products, right? So when you have some giant like Danone coming in with its dry milk that it's not even produced on the continent, they do not source milk from local farmers. They're not interested in development of this sector. Here we're not talking about agriculture, but more about dealing with the animal products as well. Yeah. Yet the problem is quite typical, right? So the local farming dies out as they're not able to compete at the market when Danone milk would cost you cents, and their products would be much more expensive, right? So this kills local farming, aside for those communities that live on that local farming themselves. But selling them at the market, it becomes problematic. Selling them at a larger scale becomes even more problematic. And of course, when you talk about agricultural products, if you go to any supermarket, you will see all those, perfect carrots and potatoes, which local farming wouldn't match the standards for that, right? So those kind of standards that are mostly oriented to products that imply gene-modified technologies and this kind of things, you can never compete with that, right? So I think this, on the one hand, and many other policies that were quite against the local production pretty much destroyed the industries in some countries, and in some countries they were suppressing development to a great extent. So the way out from here, of course, is to revise the policy from top to bottom. I would assume, and that would imply conducting major research in terms of soil, in terms of agricultural complex, which cultures and which segments could neighbor in a way in which they would be complementary to each other. Because, for example, if you have active corn production or active corn growth, it means that some of the cultures could be planted next to it and some could not, right? So there is a great science to it, and there is a lot of fundamental science on this in terms of sustainable and, let's say, natural agriculture supported by fertilizers, and the one that is more, let's say, conserving the land and using its resources in a more gentle way, right? And I really love the name of the summit, Listen to the Land, because it seems like the time has come to apply more strategically sustainable ways of agriculture than there used to be.
Sure.
So, well, coming from the Russian Federation, I can say that in our country, even though it's very rich in land, just only 15% of the land is climate-wise is good for agriculture. And agriculture in Russia is what we call risky, right? It's risky agriculture because you never know in terms of the harsh climate how the situation would unfold. Summer is quite short. In most of the regions, the temperature differences are crazy, starting from -40 in winter to +40 in the summer in regions like Siberia. So we're really good at agriculture and fertilizers, and in terms of fundamental science on this, because the conditions, weather conditions, climate conditions we have are extremely harsh.
Sure.
So this is one of the areas where cooperation is not just possible, but also quite logical. And back in the day, the Soviet scientists were quite open to that, just like at the moment, Russia is open to share not just fertilizers and not just some of the technology, but also some of the approaches based on fundamental science. And as the colleagues have mentioned previously, I think the BRICS lays perfect foundations for that, because in BRICS, what you also have, you have China, that is one of the biggest producers of equipment, and there is no way you can avoid it. Yeah. You have India, and it's developed agriculture and experience in terms of certain agricultural products, and selling them abroad. In many cases, maybe at a better price, right? And this is definitely something to look at, because when you talk about agriculture in Africa, from the very beginning, when you elaborate policies on that, it has to be divided into agriculture aimed at internal or domestic trade within the continent, agriculture aimed at foreign trade. For instance, coffee and cocoa beans are the ones that are actively exported, but consumption of coffee, let's say, in most of the African countries is not at the same level as it is in colder countries of Europe, Canada, or United States. So the key consumers would be there, the ones that consume coffee a lot and where the coffee industry is tremendous. So these are just examples, but what is key is to have a complex approach and an approach that is based on the final goal, right? So if we talk about coffee and cocoa, those are, for the most part, export goods, right? But the problem there is that the price they're being sold at is not the best, and the conditions under which they're grown are not always the best for the workers and, let's say, the labor force involved over there. And once again, just concluding this bit, I think more active cooperation within the BRICS that was recently joined by Ethiopia and Egypt, aside for South Africa representing the continent, would open up new paths to cooperate, to optimize the logistics, to optimize the approaches, and to basically accelerate the agricultural track. Because Africa, for example, is still importing a lot of sugar from Brazil, a lot of wheat and grain from Russia, and to a certain point that was Ukraine exporting. Fertilizer is coming from Russia, agricultural equipment is coming from China. So India also has a lot of relevant experience in terms of farming, but it's still an issue of state policy within to be able to lay the framework and distribute the resources and find optimal way for financing. and cooperation that, well, BRICS provides a very good negotiating position for African countries because they can choose partnerships, they can rely on the strengths and cover up for the weaknesses of other players at this arena. So I would assume that this kind of a way when some countries could consume but at a fair price, and other countries could create joint ventures and provide services in terms of research and fundamental science in order to keep it resilient. I think that combination of approaches that is possible due to the emerging multipolar world, I think that could bring most success.
Okay, and that is quite impressive for Yulia. And in the same perspective with you, Professor Wale, let's look at the role of, geopolitical alliances. How can African nations navigate their relationships now with global powers to secure fair trade and investment opportunities, and also align with their soil health and agricultural goals, of course, trying to define a scope in the multipolar world?
Yeah, thank you very much for this. I will build on the submission of the last speaker, talking about BRICS and giving particular emphasis to the need for Africa to have smart collaboration with Russia. In fact, my organization is keenly interested in this, and we want to move it forward. A couple of months ago, we looked at optimizing the African-China collaboration for agricultural research and development in Africa. There is a very strong collaboration already with the European Union Commission and African Union, and this has gone beyond 1 decade, working together, trying to learn from one another and set up instruments that can ensure that we put those learning into practice. The BRICS also has been there, but I think most of the countries that developed their agriculture in the last 60 years, talking about China in the last 40 years, from net importer of food to sufficiency, reducing poverty, to barely zero. Those are good countries. Then Brazil in the last 60 years and the model they use. There are lessons that we have teased out of this, which should inform the development trajectory of Africa, and that is going on. And I want to assure you that the African Union Commission is keen about this mutual exchange and learning. But I want to put this sentiment on the table, just like the two other male colleagues, the friend, my colleague from Nigeria and the other brother from Africa, just like they put it on the table. It is not just talking and continue to talk. It is time for Africa to work. And so when we talk about collaboration that brings in knowledge and technology, we want to test out this knowledge and technology and bring it to scale. And Africa is ready for that. As it relates to the subject of fertilizer and soil health, international or global international partnerships or global collaboration is a do-do, and Africa is open to learn how this is done. Let me move this particular point to respond to what Ojo said the other time. Practicalizing what happens in China, what happens in Brazil, suggests to me that we need to give a lot of effort and attention to conscientizing the soil users in Africa to have adequate knowledge of their resources. And this is really very important. That's one. Secondly, on the other point that Ojo spoke about very well, even we are able to achieve soil health in the next 10 years, just like the head of state has declared that we must achieve. Yes, we will go around it. Even if you do that, even if you make all the loans available to the farmer, if we do not structure
the market space for agricultural commodity that is coming from the smallholder system, these things will still fall flat. And so what I'm saying is agriculture operates within a system. You know, a comprehensive approach is required.
Indeed.
So if they produce, then we must structure. You know, he gave an example of cassava, and I followed that cassava scenario very, very well. As at that time, the world market for cassava flour was $50. But the cost of production of 1 ton of cassava flour in Africa was around $120. How do you produce that and meet up with the market? That is talking about the need to structure. And let me say that across countries in Africa, there are no lessons. There are lessons, but we need to bring these lessons to the fore and help the policymakers to see it and to work through it. I think my group published a material, Strategies for Transforming Smallholder Farming System in Africa in the year 2020. This material explicates clearly pathways to ensure that we create model for pricing of commodities such that when farmers produce, they are able to get at least, we call it livelihood compliant income from their commodities. Okay. And when this is done, we begin to see consistent growth, okay, in production. In fact, we will be able to solve many social problems that agriculture will be the only instrument to generate solutions. Problems like the upsurge in youth population and the need to generate jobs for them from agriculture. Let me conclude
absolutely,
here
yeah, Professor.
That yes, international collaboration is a do-do, and Africa is ready and is open to ensure that, especially with the BRICS, to optimize it for knowledge and technology transfer, for industrialization of African agriculture, and the related things we need to do. Thank you.
Indeed, all in efforts to ensure productivity and sustainability of the agricultural sector and ensuring the fertility of the soil across the continent. In the same perspective with you, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU, we're looking at, geopolitical alliances, global cooperation. Now we look at how, global dependencies can actually come to play now, as many African countries currently depend, according to some reports, on fertilizer import. How then can the continent reduce its vulnerability to global market fluctuations in fertilizer prices, and what geopolitical considerations, in your perspective or in your own opinion, should guide this transaction?
Clarice, let me just build on what I think Professor WOLE, if I remember his name correctly, mentioned.
Yes, Professor
because
WOLE.
This is very critical and very, very important. If you look at Brazil, that is a member of the BRICS, what did Brazil do? Because these are practical situations. I mean, pragmatics. I just hate bureaucracy. It's not part of my DNA. I mean, pragmatics. This is what Brazil did. Brazil was producing a lot of soybeans, and it was highly, highly demanded in China. But China had the technology. So what did Brazil do? Brazil went to China and said, okay, we're producing this and we're not producing it extensively. So, but you have the technology in terms of machinery and logistics and transformation and so on and so forth. So we would love to go into an alliance. The world, like you said, the world is already a multipolar world. It's not more a unipolar world anymore. We know that. So Brazil was able to go into this discussion with China, and they were able, it was a transfer, it was a transfer of technology for better or exclusive services. Go and look at the alliance or the agreement between Brazil and China and how Brazil used that to now transform the agricultural sector in the country. Why can't African countries do the same? Why can't African countries use the same strategy? They are members of the BRICS. They are flogging into all these South-South cooperation. We see China coming in. We see India coming in. We thank God for Russia coming in. Like Yulia said, Russia is having a challenge with agriculture because, like she said, only 15% of Russia, if I got her correctly, is able to, it's hospitable for good agriculture because of their climate and so on. But they have the technology. They have what it takes to produce to do extensive agriculture. These African countries need to re-strategize and say, we know that you need what we're producing. We're producing cocoa, we're producing rubber, we're producing cassava, we're producing beans, we're producing soy, we're producing this, but we do not have the capacity. Can we go into an alliance with country A, maybe Russia, country B, maybe China, country C, maybe Brazil, and have an alliance where you transfer technology for us? Then we rearrange our trade agreements. Countries have the right to do that. It's no more a unipolar world. It's a bipolar world. Every country has the right to deal with a particular country based on bilateral agreements. They can go into those bilateral agreements with those countries, produce these, and have a leeway of supplying those services to them at a priority rate than they're dealing with those countries. That's what Brazil did. What's wrong with Africa in doing that? So it is a strategy problem that we have in Africa. I will keep repeating this. It is a strategy problem. Number two, you talked about, multipolar world. How can Africa make use of this? It's even an opportunity for Africa. We have the BRICS that you talked about. We have the South-South corporations where India is coming with their technology, China is coming with their technology, Russia has the technology, and so on. Africa can make use of that. We do not, I know the United States and Europe were so dominant in Africa, but Africa, the world is changing. Why can't they make use of these other partners that are coming in and say, we know you have what it takes for all these. My colleague from Nigeria talked about transformation, for example. Tomatoes, let's be specific here. If you take, for example, tomatoes that is produced in Nigeria, a lot of that do not have the capacity to transform that tomatoes into paste and preserve it and sell massively. Well, apart from Dangote and a few others, but a lot of the local farmers do not have that capacity. They cannot compete. They cannot compete in the international market. The government of Nigeria can go in to enhance capacity by making sure that these people have local facilities that can enable them transform their products into semi-finished products so that they can be competitive in the world. You talk about cocoa, for example. We see that in the world right now, cocoa beans is very scarce because there's low production of it. But we still find that cocoa is being shipped from West Africa, is being transformed in the West here, and then the competitive advantage the African countries would have had, they lose that, even though this is a rare commodity that is only produced in West Africa. You see, these are common sense things that African countries can embark on, and they increase capacity. Even from a geopolitical perspective, where they are now dealing with Russia, they are now dealing with the BRICS, they are now dealing with India, they're no more dependent on Europe and the United States and so on. Why can't they take advantage of this geopolitical world that is existing now and then build those alliances? They can do that. The problem is strategy, strategy, strategy. They are leaving the target and they're chasing, this one, they are signing collateral agreement on weapons, they are signing collateral agreements on this and that, and forgetting what their competitive advantage is. Agriculture, agriculture, agriculture.
Advantage and competitive intelligence, of course, and that is what Africa has. This question directing to you, Dr. Temitope, with Africa possessing already possessing a significant share of the world's uncultivated arable land. How, therefore, can countries leverage this resource to ensure their enhance their geopolitical standing in global food markets?
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for that question. First and foremost, because I know a lot has been said, and I'll try not to be tautological about my discourse at this moment.
Yeah.
I think we also need a massive investment in research and development. That cannot be overemphasized. We need to be, just like the way the last speaker said, we need to be pragmatic about the whole thing. Let's look at the percentage contribution of the GDP to research and development in Africa. Take, for example, at least I'm from Nigeria, fine, I'm currently in Canada for my postdoc, but with my experience in Nigeria and the kind of experience, like even speaking about the universities, the research and development and the like, contribution of Africa, contribution of Africa to research and development is so minute. I think at this moment, we just have to be pragmatic about the whole thing. There should be a paradigm shift about the investment in research and development. Fine, we have, like, based on what statistics have said, that more than 60% of arable land in Africa is still lying fallow, that we've not even cultivated and the likes. It is not only about the available land. We have the land, but if we have these research and development being pumped upon, and there is this kind of yield, because the productivity you're talking about is not just about the acreage increment. It can actually be in terms of this fertilizer we are talking about, like taking the tons, or for example, of cereal from 1 point something to like let's say 7.8, just like what happens in the US. That should be a massive investment in research and development in terms of, okay, in this particular geopolitical zones, what kind of soil structure is needed to produce this particular crop? Where do you have the comparative advantage? So if all these studies are put in place, then to come up with a kind of pragmatic, a kind of a framework that will be able to develop this particular acreage would not be a problem. Fine, I believe these farmers still need to be encouraged, because I still have to go back to the case of capital.
Yeah.
If you do not have enough capacity in terms of finances, you cannot extend, you cannot even increase the land size you want to go into production, because the ones you cultivated the last year, you could not sell, because the market integration that is supposed to be in place is not yet in place. So all these things, they are still boils down to the fact that research and development in Africa needs to be taken care of. Thank God for FARA, because at least I've followed Professor FATUNBI, at least some of his studies in FARA, and with some of the mentors in my department. I believe they are doing well, but I believe we still need enough investment in terms of research and development in Africa. With that, trust me, we'll be able to compete with the Western world to an extent in the next 10 years and the likes. So then, in terms of that, also the rural development I talked about, road networks is quite very important. And I'm happy that the last speaker also said something about the issue of the tomato transformation and the likes.
Yeah.
These things must be put in place, whether we like it or not, for us to be able to achieve that desired goal, for us to be able to get to that economic growth that we are clamoring for. Then there is need for us to be able to, like, say, let's pump more investment into research and development. Thank you.
Absolutely, it's about identifying the scope and putting all the elements together for a positive outcome in the agricultural sector. Indeed, let's listen to the land. We're going to take a short break before we conclude with our session on agriculture this moment. Listen to the land. Soil health determines our food security. A strong voice from the Africa Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit in Nairobi, Kenya. It's a call for action.
Let us to develop the Soil Initiative for Africa and the Africa Fertilizer.
Head of states and government in union with the Nairobi Declaration urge to triple fertilizer production, provides agronomic recommendations, and ensure access for smallholder farmers.
Fertilizer availability. Production of fertilizer using locally available raw materials in our continent.
60% of the world's uncultivated arable land, according to President William Ruto, is in Africa. Thus, it's time to mobilize resources, build national capacity, and share knowledge for sustainable soil management practices across Africa.
Is core for food security on the continent.
To sustain the current and future generations.
To President Faustin Archange Touadera of the Central African Republic, nearly 70% of the active population engaged in agriculture production, an opportunity for Africa to address its soils. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to take the concluding phase of this program, and we kick off with you, Professor WOLE. Just 1 minute. Let's try to bring together the point, discuss, and give practical recommendations that the stakeholders will take to the table of decision making to ensure sustainability.
Yeah, thank you very much. My remark will be important for us to begin to see agriculture as a system. And I am quite glad the way you have handled the discussion, bringing the different elements of agriculture as a system, but seeing the soil as the primary instrument that we must put in place to ensure that our agriculture become productive, become resilient, and we are able to feed our population and also export to the global world. Okay. What we need is what we are beginning to get, good political will from our leaders. And we cannot stop to begin to give them the right information from the scientific angle, from decent analysis, not from social movement. As we continue to do that, gradually we will be able to bring the type of transformation we need in the sector. Let me say that African Union the Department of Agriculture at the African Union is doing its bit. FARA is the technical arm of the African Union Commission on Agricultural Research and Development Issue. Is doing its full best to ensure that things are going on in Africa. And
thank you.
To implement the action plan, I think it's sufficient for us to deliver it, and the instrument to deliver good action is already in place.
Okay, thank you so much.
Let me stop there.
Thank you, Professor WOLE FATUNBI, for that coming to you. Briefly, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU, what insights and next steps as we round off with this edition of Global Insight?
I would say practical solution, practical solution, practical solution. Let's, number one, if you look at countries in Africa that are doing so well now in agriculture, they are not, their countries even in war. Go to Niger. The fastest growing economy in the world now is Niger, a war-torn country in Africa. Why? Because the leader there has come and implemented concrete agricultural policy. The number one source of income now is agriculture. Go to Ethiopia. Ethiopia is fast coming us as the second. They are developing the cocoa and so on, and all the cash crops. They're developing it. They are not using bureaucratic means. It's not based on United Nations or African Union or anything. Practical solutions to concrete problems on the ground. Okay. That is how Africa is going to come out of this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU, Director of Center for Africa Development. To you, dear Yulia, the a holistic approach or summary of what we discussed and the way forward.
Yes, concluding this topic regarding fertilizer and soil, I would completely agree with the fact that practical steps are needed and active cooperation in order to be able to implement the best practices and see where and how real joint ventures could help accelerate growth and could help find optimal solutions for the issues that exist right now. So I think now is the best time for Africa to use its negotiating position and to benefit from it strategically.
Indeed, very imperative for defining the African agenda. And we're closing with you, Dr. TEMITOPE. What is the take-home message, especially for those at the forefront at the African Union?
Thank you very much. I'd like to conclude by giving the say of Professor Wole Soyinka. He said, and I quote, that no one is rich enough to buy yesterday, but if you can struggle enough, you can actually take care of your tomorrow. But your tomorrow is actually dependent on your today. And this is a clear call for the leaders in the continent, for them to put together pragmatic solutions for us to be able to feed ourselves. Africans should be able to feed Africa. We should not be reliant on the importation. So putting together the practical solutions, trust me, in the next 10 years, we'll be coming together to appreciate this particular moment. Thank you very much.
And thank you indeed. The time for action is now. I'll end by reiterating, of course, the words of Mahatma Gandhi, an Indian activist. To forget how to dig the earth and to tend the soil is to forget ourselves. And it is this, on this note that I will conclude today's edition of Global Insight on For You Media Africa. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for trusting For You Media. It's another view of the world. This program was brought to you by the Africa Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit.